This will be a little bit less, shall we say, academic and more lowbrow than the presentations that we're used to. It's been my avocation since I retired, and here we go. So the first group of characters I'm going to talk about are the pioneers of the Murphy Party. A gentleman by the name of Martin Murphy from County Wexford, who had earlier farmed in Canada and in Missouri, came over the Donner Pass when California was still a Mexican or a possession in 1844. Without a loss of life. Now, they did a couple of different things to the Donner Party. They had good guides, old Western traders and hunters and trappers. And many of the party had lived in Canada and knew how to make snowshoes and knew how to operate in heavy snow. So when they did get trapped in the mountains in the early snows, they were able to get out of it. In any event, two of Martin Murphy's sons went mining and were millionaires by 1850. Among other things, they founded the town of Murphy's up in the Sierras. One, John, later was mayor of San Jose and made a major contribution to starting the college that became San Jose State. Another character by the name of John Sullivan from Limerick, who initially had a store up in the Sierras and then started mining and took a lot of money out on a place called Sullivan's Creek near Sonora, which is still there. He later became a big property mogul in San Francisco. He owned blocks in town. He helped to found an entity called the Hibernia Savings and Loan, which was a major financial entity in San Francisco in the 19th century. And he funded, to my knowledge, about 5 churches or convents, and also the St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park before he passed away in 1900. William Shannon immigrated to upstate New York with his family. He grew up and was educated there and went to apprentice with a law firm in Albany, passed the state bar in 1846. And when the Mexican War broke out, he volunteered. He was elected a captain of Stevenson's New York Volunteers. They were shipped around the Horn in 1847 and did garrison duty in Monterey and San Diego before being mustered out in San Diego in 1848. And naturally enough, they took that option rather than going back east. They formed a mining company and went north to the Yuba River, which is north of Sacramento. He had a store, was appointed alcalde of the region. He helped the miners write their mining rules of the district. And when some Texas landowners came in with slaves and tried to make multiple claims in the area, he led the miners in running them off. And then when a Chilean guy came in with a number of indentured indigenous workers and tried to do the same thing, he did that as well. As a result of that, he was elected by the miners to the State Constitutional Convention in 1849. At the time, Southern California had large numbers of slave owners. And he led the fight of the northern miners against the slave owners in the Constitutional Convention and carried the day. The Constitution was sent to Washington for approval, and he went back to Sacramento where a cholera outbreak had occurred. And sadly, he died there at the age of 30 in 1850. He never saw or lived to see California actually become a state. Miles Poor O'Connor came as a young man to New York in 1839 and He had an uncle in St. Louis and went there in 1843, and his uncle educated him at St. Louis U. His brother was killed in the Mexican War, the Battle of Buena Vista. He came overland to California in 1849 and practiced law and penned for gold in the Grass Valley region. He was elected a Justice of the Peace in 1859 as a Douglas Democrat and a state senator in 1869 in an area that was very, very Republican. There were very few Democrats elected in that area. But he hit it big when he was the lead investor of a company that started the Idaho mine in 1863. Initially, it didn't do very well. A lot of the early California quartz mines had problems because they were dealing with sulfurettes, and at the time they didn't know how to handle the sulfurettes. And it wasn't until about 1867 when the technology from the Comstock got back into Grass Valley that they actually began to process effectively. But by 1875, that mine was paying $1 million a year in dividends, and he was getting about a third of it. So he moved out of the area. He funded a railroad up there, and when his the state senateship ended in 78, he moved to first to San Jose and then briefly to Baltimore, where he amassed a massive art collection. He funded the O'Connor, it was called a sanitarium initially in San Jose, and donated a huge art collection. He initially wanted to donate it to the state, and not the state, to the city, and the city basically said, we don't want it. So he actually built an art gallery at Catholic University in Washington to put it in. On top there is his house, or was his house. It's presently the site of Notre Dame School in San Jose. On the bottom is his grave site in Santa Clara Cemetery. Conor Reilly was what we would call a common miner, born in County Cavan, and learned his mining trade in southern Wisconsin in the lead mines. Came to California via Panama in 1852. And he sunk the shaft in the Allison Ranch mine in Grand Valley, in Grass Valley, 1854. The Allison Ranch was quite unusual in that it was a very shallow mine. So they were actually able to recover the gold relatively easily for a quartz mine. Whereas most, again, the other quartz mines in California, the ore was at depth and was much more reduced. This mine paid 1.3 million in dividends on about 3 million in ore over a 12-year period. It shut down in 1866, and there was a lot of stuff in the local newspapers about how badly managed it was and how drunk the Irish were and so on and so forth. But 3 or 4 different people afterwards went back and they sunk the mine, the shaft down to 1,200 feet. They never found another penny. Con was not as successful in some other Grass Valley mines, but he went over to Ireland and England in the 1870s, where he met and was taken in by the mining con man called Whittaker Hughes, and was involved in a whole series of lawsuits against him. He did return to California and tried his hand at the San Francisco Mining Exchange, as well as a few other ventures and property and so on, but he was not very successful, and he died a poor man in Oakland in about 1913, I believe. John Downey trained as a pharmacist in Baltimore and came to California. Not particularly successful as a miner, but he married well into a Californio family down in southern part of the state near Whittier, present-day Whittier. He became a significant landowner in Southern California. And again, Southern California had a lot of pro-slavery and pro-Southern operators down there. And they had a group of Democrats that were called the Shivs. And he was elected lieutenant governor in 1859 on the Shiv ticket. The governor was Milton Latham. And then Latham got elected senator in 1860. So Downey became governor for 2 years. And the Shivs basically told him to secede or take the state of California out of the Union. And he did neither. He stayed loyal to the Union and raised regiments as requested by Lincoln. However, he lost his political base and lived out his life as a very successful businessman and developer. Among the things he did was he was the founder of the Farmers and Merchants Bank, which was he along with a man called Isaiah Hellman, developed that, and it was the most successful bank in the 19th century in Southern California. The town of Downey is named after him. And he also thought Southern California needed a university. So he founded the University of Southern California. And I find it a bit ironic that University of Notre Dame, which are called the Fighting Irish, were founded by a bunch of French missionaries who got lost in northern Indiana. Whereas their big football rival, Southern California, was actually founded by an Irishman. We don't know much about Miles Cosgrove. He was from County Wicklow, a place called Barndarrig, which means the Red Gap. It's very close to Avoca, which was a mining area where there was some gold mining, some lead mining, and even some copper mining back in the 19th century in Ireland. And he was probably a miner there. And his obituary mentions that he was one of 3 Cosgrove brothers that died in mining accidents in the United States, which is not atypical of things in the 19th century. James O'Brien, and that's his house up there, and the picture of his house still in Smartsville in California. It's right there on O'Brien Road. He came to California in 1853 and he mined on the Yuba River. Smartsville is close to the Yuba River. And he started building roads and water ditches by contract, primarily employing Chinese labor because the Irish wouldn't work in that kind of low-paying work, basically. He established a hydraulic mining operation near Smartsville in 1859, which became known as the Excelsior Water and Mining Company. It was very successful. So successful, in fact, that he was named in every single suit that the farmers down in the Sacramento Valley and Marysville area who were complaining about the waste from the hydraulic mining coming down. And he was smart enough to sell out in 1876, but continued to manage the operation until the Sawyer decision in 1884 shut down hydraulic mining. And then he retired to ranching and fruit farming. One thing that was really unique about him, well, not unique, but he was given credit for being the first person to use electric light on an industrial site. And he did that around 1880 so that they could hydraulically mine. Hydraulically mine, you only have the water to do it for about 3 or 4 months a year in California. And obviously being able to do it at night, and the paraffin lamps they had available at the time weren't very good. And he lit it up with electric light. He couldn't read or write. And this is a bit of Gaelic on Sagar to Roon, which means our beloved pastor. Pat Minogue was 6 feet 4 inches tall, which was a giant in that time. And he entered a seminary in Chicago, but it closed down during a cholera epidemic in 1853. So he came west and joined his 2 brothers, John and Michael, in Moores Flat, California, which would be a little bit north of Grass Valley. And he was known as a gentle giant there. He was noted for being able to solve disputes between different miners, and he was especially respected by the Chinese, who did a lot of hydraulic mining in California, and being able to settle disputes between the Chinese and other miners. The Bishop Almanet picked him up in 1857 and sent him to Paris, where he was ordained in 1861. He served as almost 20 years as pastor in Virginia City, Nevada, where he became known as the beloved priest by the Irish miners. One of the sad things he had to do there, his brother Michael was run over by a railroad train in 1871 and was brought to the parish house and lived his last few hours of his life there. He was named a bishop in 1883 and became Bishop of Sacramento in 1885. That's the cathedral in Sacramento. John Mackey basically paid for that cathedral, and it was built in 2 years. And if you've ever been inside it, it's pretty incredible. St. Patrick's in New York took some 40 years to build. John Conness was a successful miner and a store owner before entering politics. He ran for lieutenant governor and governor as a Douglas Democrat and lost in the first time to Latham, and in the second time he lost to Leland Stanford. But he was elected a U.S. Senator. Back then, the U.S. Senator was elected by the combined legislatures in 63. He was a very strong supporter of the Union and of Lincoln during the war, and became a vocal supporter of Chinese rights in his last years in office, which basically cost him his political base. An example of how strong the anti-Chinese sentiment was, in California, they had a referendum on Chinese immigration, and the vote was 99.4% to exclude the Chinese. And they had one in Nevada later, and there the vote was 98.9% to exclude the Chinese. So supporting Chinese immigration was not a good political position. So he had to retire to his wife's farm in Massachusetts after his term ended. I think I'm running a bit too long. I think everybody knows pretty well about John Mackey. The one thing I'll mention about him is his wife. He married a Louise Bryant. She was a widow, and she was a very socially conscious lady. And John absolutely supported her in the style in which she had become accustomed. While he was mining, she went off. Well, first she went to New York, but she couldn't get into society in New York, so she went to Paris and became a noted celebrity entertainer in Paris, entertaining, among other people, Ulysses Grant after he had finished his time in office. And then after somebody in France wrote a scandalous book about an American millionaire in Paris, she moved to London, and where John bought her a place called 6 Carlton Place, which was a house that was originally built by the Dukes of Leinster, the Fitzgerald family, but they had run on hard times in the 1880s and 90s. And John's children were educated in British schools, actually. And she was presented to Queen Victoria, which was the absolute highlight of her life. And there you are. Marcus Daly, I will skip over as well, but I'll mention 2 things. His statue here, it's outside the Montana Tape in Montana, and it was erected by the Butte Miners Union, which was the strongest mining union in the West for 40-some years. The other thing about him was that he started not 1 but 2 Montana towns. He started Anaconda, almost got it voted into the state capital, came very close. And he also started at the town of Hamilton in the Bitterroot Valley in western Montana. There's a beautiful Daly mansion there if you ever go to visit, called Riverside. But he started a truck farming operation out there. And it was very successful for its first about 50, 60 years before, refrigerated trucks started coming in from other states. James Graham Fair, I think, is the most interesting, actually, of the Bonanza group. Came from the north of Ireland, was a Presbyterian, and mined fairly successfully in areas of Shaw's Flat, Angels Camp, Carson Hill in California. There was a girl there called Teresa Rooney, who was Catholic. Her parents were from New York. They had a boarding house, and she ran the boarding house for her parents. This was a time when California had a ratio of men to women of 10-1. And the Presbyterian, Jim Fair, married Teresa Rooney. He went to the Comstock, got fired from his first job, but then turned everything around when he got together with Mackey and created the great Bonanza firm. He was absolutely fascinated by new technology. So he was responsible for bringing roots blowers, the Barley air drills, all these massive hoists, the big Sierra water line that brought the water down from the Sierras across the Carson Valley and back up into Virginia City. On top there is a little pilot stamp mill that he played around with. The other thing, he got himself elected as senator from Nevada in 1880 as a Democrat. His only speech, sadly, was in favor of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Teresa sued him for divorce in 1883. It was a sensational divorce case and got a third of his estate. And he was kind of cheesed off because the other Bonanza principals supported Teresa in the divorce case. And he was known to say about the others, he said, "Oh, sure, a pair of them were behind the bar and another one was behind a wheelbarrow when I met him." And he just put him down tremendously. But he was a successful railroad builder, a very tremendous property mogul. And right there in front, that's the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. He started building that. He bought a property on Nob Hill, and he started building that before he died. And then his daughters went in and they finished it. And he was so fascinated by new technology, he built it with reinforced concrete. And during the fire, before it was finished in 1906 that followed the earthquake, it got gutted, but the structure was perfect. So when San Francisco was rebuilt, it was rebuilt with reinforced concrete. I mean, he was one of the pioneers of that. Am I running a bit over, Barbara?
Just a bit. I know that you've just got a couple more to go, right?
I'll quickly on Brown. What Brown did was basically two things. He wrote the minutes of the California State Convention, but he was kind of a Mark Twain before Mark Twain, but he didn't have Twain's wonderful writing and conversational skills. He had numerous government jobs, including Indian agent and so on, but he was very naive commercial. And the first job of any government contractor at the time was to make his own money and then maybe do what he was supposed to do. But he thought the other way around. He thought he was supposed to do his job first and not worry about the money. So as a result of that, he didn't get paid an awful lot. He wrote a great description, the first great description of mining in the Western United States in 1868. And as a result of that, it was so well received that basically that led to the formation of the Bureau of Mines and the annual report on mining in the US that still continues almost to this day. He was appointed ambassador to China and was very respectful of the Chinese, but politically naive, and he got kicked out by the new Grant administration, and died a relatively poor man. He did great sketching for a number of magazines, including, and wrote a lot of stories with associated sketches. That one there shows everybody being blown around in Virginia City in the weather. Was published in Harper's magazine. I think I'll skip Patrick and Flood. Let me go to Nellie. So Nellie came, probably really not a 49er. She came to California in 1865 and with her mother and her sister. Her sister married and had a family. Her standard procedure was she would head off. First place she went was Pioche in southern Nevada. And she would go in and she would either buy a boarding house or start one, or start a restaurant and get intelligence from the miners and then go out prospecting. And she did that almost everywhere she went. She became quite famous, became known as the Angel of the Cassiar, after she took a group of a search party to in the winter across northern British Columbia, I think in 1871, to a place called the Stikine River, to basically rescue a bunch of starving miners. Took 1,500 pounds of potatoes and like 100 pounds of lemons, and basically, I think, caused the survival of about 70 miners who would otherwise have probably died. Her sister died young, so she raised her widowed sister's children before shipping them off to boarding school, and was also known to raise millions for hospitals. In her last years, she among the other places she was in was Tombstone. She built a church, or helped to build a church in Tombstone, but she worked in the Koyukuk area of Alaska, and mined there and tried to raise money, through stock and so on. Up there, she had a boarding house in the Klondike during the Klondike strike in 1896-98 as well. But she finally died and is buried in Victoria, British Columbia. So there's a Canadian historian called Lucy Camping, and she basically said the Irish immigrants were supreme networkers. That's how they got to places. They had this incredible, for the time, intelligence network, and had this ability to converge on places. As a group, they were very ambitious. They were always the first to move to new areas. Among the first, they were all over the West. Western Canada, Idaho, Montana, Colorado, you name it. They were there first, and Alaska, British Columbia. They embraced, contract mining systems. They really aspired to ownership, and they embraced the Cornish contract system, which none of the other miners did. And they wouldn't get into low-paying ditch construction or mercury mining. Like, for instance, there was a mine here near San Jose called the New Almaden Mercury Mine, which was mined by Cornish and Hispanic miners. The Irish wouldn't go there because they paid $2.50 a day, and the Irish expected $5. They weren't tied to mining. Thousands moved on to other occupations and all kinds of things. And if you go through the old histories of the counties of the Sierras, you'll see, in the 1880s when these were written, people would put in their bios, the respectable people of the county, and there are Irish people in every one of them. They were very politically astute, not necessarily all Democrats. Shannon was a Whig and Mackey was a Republican and could have been elected to office but didn't want it. Abe Lincoln, for instance, did not get a single vote in Allison Ranch district of Nevada City in the election of 1864. It all went to McClellan. Sadly, there was a terrible legacy of anti-Chinese behavior. Somewhat less so in the early years, but became a mantra of the Irish State Unions and the hard rock years. And there were exceptions to people who didn't engage in that, but sadly, it was one of the terrible things about that period. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. Then I'll just at the top to unshare your screen. There we go. That in there. We go. Any questions? Remember to unmute. I think everybody got muted, so unmute yourself if you've got questions.
Good story, Ed.
Thank you.
Ed, this is Henry in Minnesota. Nellie Cashman, the name Cashman in Las Vegas is a very big name there. Do you know of any connection? I see in your notes there that she prospected in Nevada, but do you know of any direct connection to Las Vegas area?
Not really. I don't believe Nellie ever was there. There was something else actually I meant to mention about Nellie, but I don't believe there's any in relation to the Cashmans in Las Vegas. Nellie, to my knowledge, is the only minor that I know of. Herbert Hoover is on the stamp, on a U.S. stamp, but Nellie got her own stamp in 1994, I believe, U.S. stamp. And I believe she's the only person who's on there for being a minor. Again, Herbert Hoover is on a U.S. stamp, but he got there for being U.S. president.
Sure. Thank you.
Unless anybody else knows of one. If they do, let me know so that I won't say that anymore. I've made that claim for her a few times.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was very good.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Right.
Good night.